What are the unmet needs for PAH patients?
Pulmonary arterial hypertension patients have a lot of need because the disease is so progressive. When patients have pulmonary arterial hypertension, it causes them to feel very short of breath. They can't exert themselves. But fundamentally, the disease process causes a progression of their heart disease. So the blood vessels that come from the heart that go to the lungs become blocked. They become smaller because of the process of this disease. And that resistance takes a high capacitance system and makes it a low capacitance system, high resistance. But the pump's not designed to pump against that. And when that right ventricle fails, unfortunately, that causes people to die. Their prognosis is rapidly changed when the right ventricle fails. So many of the unmet needs of people with pulmonary arterial hypertension really revolve around how do we preserve the right ventricle? How do we keep it from failing? And the drugs and the innovations and the monitoring that we have now will, I believe, revolutionize that task of keeping the right ventricle well.
What is the role of CardioMEMS in monitoring pulmonary arterial blood pressure?
CardioMEMS is a unique device in that it is a sensor that is empowered by external interrogation. So many of the limitations of implantable devices revolve around the leads that we have to use to get to the heart, for example, with pacemakers, batteries that have to be implanted and then have to be changed. This device doesn't have either of those components. It's simply the sensor that is safely placed inside the pulmonary artery from either a vein in the neck or a vein in the groin. We permanently implant it there. It is incorporated into the wall of the blood vessel. And then patients are able to go home with what we call a patient electronics system, lie back on an antenna. The antenna then interrogates the device with radiofrequency energy. Very safe. It doesn't produce cancer. It's not oncogenic. So that energy then allows us to measure the pressures locally in the pulmonary artery. Now, why would we want to do that? Well, in many diseases like heart failure, pulmonary arterial hypertension, lung disease, the problems that arise as a result of the heart disease or the lung disease result in an increase in those pressures. And those pressures are fluctuant. They can go up, they can come down, and they reflect many times how much fluid's in the body. And many of these diseases causes people to hold on abnormally to too much fluid, and that causes them to get further short of breath, and then they many times have to come in the hospital to manage that. So CardioMEMS measures directly those pressures and gives that information on a regular basis to physicians and nurses to manage patients remotely. So CardioMEMS actually makes distance irrelevant. We have physicians and nurses caring for people. The physicians and nurses are in Florida. They care for people in Brazil because it doesn't matter where they are. They can lie back and upload information through the internet, and the providers can see those pressures. Now, interestingly, when we see patients in a clinical setting, all the things we do, maneuvers we do, which we call the physical exam, thousands of years old, we do to estimate those pressures that CardioMEMS measures. So the fidelity of information we get from CardioMEMS, even at a remarkable distance, is better than what we would have if we were trying to peer in from the outside of the body. So CardioMEMS has revolutionized not only how we understand this disease works, heart failure, pulmonary arterial hypertension, lung disease, but it's revolutionized how we can manage it.
How did the pioneering technology behind CardioMEMS evolve?
The CardioMEMS technology evolved through a series of experiments that have gone over, probably nearly 30 years. Began with a system that had a lead and a battery that was implanted in the body. And then we learned a lot from that system. It measured pressures all the time. So 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. The problem with the system was that that was a lot of information to try to understand and how to manage. and the batteries had to be replaced. So all of the limitations of implantable devices were a part of that. We've experimented to try to measure pressures in other places, like what we call the left atrium, which is one of the top chambers of the heart. But from a safety and efficacy perspective, we found that measuring pressures in the pulmonary artery, so in the lung circulation, was the best view of all the things we need to know to manage the blood volume that's abnormal in many patients, but also the vascular or the blood vessel problems that occur in these diseases. We then found this microelectromechanical systems process. Now, microelectromechanical systems are ubiquitous. The medical application of this technology is very small compared to the consumer application. So all the pressure information you get, for example, from your car about the tires comes from a microelectromechanical system. There's multiple systems within our cell phones. I mean, everywhere we go, microelectromechanical systems are present. So we applied that technology to a medical application because we knew we could make a very small sensor. We wouldn't have to have all the other things that cause problems, and then tested it in a prospective clinical trial and demonstrated that if you know these pressures, if you can safely get them when the patient's at home in their own environment, you can adjust medications to keep people well and out of the hospital with a better quality of life. All the things we want to do as physicians and nurses, healthcare providers, to make people with chronic disease get better. And we've now done multiple clinical trials in multiple different designs in the disease congestive heart failure, demonstrating very consistent results, specifically reducing the need for people to get really, really sick that need to come in the hospital, but also, again, improving quality of life. And now to prolong life, we've discovered that this approach now prolongs life. Because when patients get really super sick and require hospitalization, that makes their whole heart and blood vessels get worse. And so if we can avoid that, we now see that translating into long-term survival benefit.
What is the primary use of CardioMEMS, and how could it add value for patients with PAH?
CardioMEMS primarily is indicated for people who have congestive heart failure that are symptomatic. So our United States FDA indication includes people who have mild to moderate symptoms of heart failure, who've either been hospitalized or have a biomarker that suggests that they have too much fluid in their system. In Europe, the CE mark indication is for people who have what we call New York Heart Association Class 3 symptoms, so moderate symptoms, who've been previously hospitalized. So there's a little bit of difference in the use in Europe compared to, or CE mark countries compared to the United States. That disease, congestive heart failure, affects about 24 million people in the Western world. 7 million of those live in the United States, and in the United States, that disease is the number one reason for people to be hospitalized in Medicare beneficiaries in the United States. So reducing hospitalizations, improving quality of life is very important for those patients. CardioMEMS is used in that setting for the goal of managing the pressures, keeping people well, stable, and out of the hospital. For pulmonary arterial hypertension, we're now investigating the safety of using CardioMEMS in the CS1 Sorrento trial. We will be evaluating the safety of implanting the device in this population, which we've studied a small number of folks, and it seems to be quite safe and very effective to guide medical therapy for pulmonary arterial hypertension patients. And the reason that's the case is because you can imagine the name suggests that the blood pressure is high in the pulmonary artery, because it is, and that's how the disease is defined. But this disease also causes this problem of outflow from the right ventricles. Now we've developed an algorithm that we can now measure not only the pressure, but the outflow from the right ventricle. And that, I think, is the fundamental basis of how these drugs work, and the goals of treatment is to change that parameter. So CardioMEMS now for this population, if proven safe, could very well revolutionize how we treat the disease.
Abbott and Cereno Scientific are collaborating in the innovative Phase 2 study of CS1 in patients with PAH. How did this collaboration come about?
This is a very unique collaboration between Abbott and Cereno. The corporate-to-corporate negotiations to be able to do such a study were not difficult to do, but were innovative and novel. It was very clear that CardioMEMS technology would potentially benefit the development of drugs that have their primary effect on the blood pressure in the lungs. That could, as an endpoint of a trial, really make clinical trials much more efficient by not having to understand over a long period of time how drugs affect patients. Because if drugs now lower blood pressure, that's what they're intended to do. If they do that safely, then that's translating into modifying the disease. And if you think about blood pressure in the body, so high blood pressure that we think of when we think of high blood pressure, where we measure the blood pressure in our arm with the sphygmomanometer, no longer do we have to do clinical trials in hundreds of thousands of people to understand if lowering those pressures are beneficial to people. We all know, gosh, we probably all know what our blood pressure should be, because we have done lots of trials to demonstrate if we lower those pressures, you reduce, for example, the risk of stroke, the risk of heart attack, risk of heart failure, risk of kidney failure. So now we understand if a drug lowers pressures, it equates to those outcomes. And we can do that much more efficiently in systemic hypertension. We believe that that can happen with pulmonary hypertension as well.
In terms of CardioMEMS, what are your hopes for the phase 2 study of CS1 in patients with PAH?
We look to this collaboration in this clinical trial to evaluate the safety of implanting CardioMEMS in the population of patients with World Health Organization Group 1 pulmonary hypertension. We don't have an indication for that. And so the United States FDA has also had a unique collaborative approach by bringing together the drug division of FDA with the device division of FDA. Now, they've been remarkably collaborative and encouraging in this process. And so as a result, now we are able to implant CardioMEMS in pulmonary arterial hypertension patients. The device side will watch the drug regulatory pathway and determine the safety and efficacy of CardioMEMS in the population. We want to have CardioMEMS indicated for this population. We believe that that innovation can completely change the way these patients are treated, how their drugs can be personalized to them, and see this as an innovation that could really benefit that population. So our goals of the trial will be for a new indication for CardioMEMS to be used in this population.
What are the key challenges for managing PAH patients over the next 10 years?
I think the key challenges for managing pulmonary arterial hypertension patients over the next several years will be to not only prolong life, but to improve quality of life, because polypharmacy of this disease not only is extraordinarily expensive, but it requires very uniquely trained individuals to deliver the drugs. Some of the drugs are constantly applied in the vein and not orally taken. And so being able to make the drugs effective, convenient for the patient with little side effects, I think it is still one of the most important goals of innovation in this area. Unfortunately, currently, what has to happen is multiple drugs are started. Several months later, we look with a spot check of an invasive hemodynamic test called a right heart catheterization, and we try to figure out, are the drugs working? And sometimes we get it 3 months or 4 months and say, you know what, they're not working. But 4 months have gone by while patients are taking drugs that don't work. And so what we believe with CardioMEMS is that we can now make that process much more efficient. Because when you apply a drug, you know, we will find from this trial, we know what will happen. And we know what time frame to wait to see how those pressures can come down. And we won't have to bring patients back into the cath lab and do an invasive procedure to get that information. So real-time information about how drugs work will allow us to personalize the pharmacologic therapy that can be, again, very cumbersome, very difficult to deliver, and very expensive. I think everyone has great expectations about how, in the next 10 years, this will evolve. I think we're only limited by our imagination, honestly. And one could envision closed-loop pump systems in which a sensor informs a pump how to deliver a drug without the patient even having to take medications. And those kinds of Star Wars type technologies just around the corner. When we have then advanced analytics with this data flow, analytics like artificial intelligence or machine learning, the computers can understand things that we never will see. And I think the future is just remarkably bright to bring these technologies together to develop drugs for this disease and others. So this is a demonstration project. This is to tell the world how drugs can be developed, how drugs can be personalized for a very deadly and difficult disease to treat.
For more episodes of our Insight series, please follow Cereno Scientific on LinkedIn or our YouTube channel.